Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, and no wait, no, I messed up that intro. Gosh darn it. Welcome to the channel if you're new, and welcome back if you aren't. I'm EDJ, and I'm continuing with the Napoleonic War series on, Epic History TV. So last time we saw the Berezina battle, which was bloody, and yeah, just a complete bloodbath. And, now here we are at the most infamous and probably most well-known part of Napoleon's entire invasion of Russia. Him trying to get out of Russia. because Napoleon was under the impression that after Borodino and the capture of Moscow, which held such great importance to the Russians, that alright, they're gonna sue for peace, we've won, guys, and that's not what happened. Instead, he got left on red after making terms, and when winter had set in and he probably couldn't stay in Moscow because of how torched it was, he realized, oh crap, and then tried to book it out of there while being stalked by Cossacks and whatnot. I think Napoleon at this point was so close to capture at certain points that he had a vial of poison around his neck, I've heard, that he was considering drinking in case, and that's just how bad things got, So like I said, this is the most infamous part, and we're about to witness it. That's really all I have to say about the intro. If you want to watch this video without me talking, my little bubble here in the corner, or, me pausing to talk or give whatever insights I have, the link to this video will be down in the description down below. With that said, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Let's watch Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, 1812. Peace lies in Moscow. Yeah, Napoleon, I think you were wrong on that.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history. The 15th of September, 1812. 83 days after invading Russia, a week after his costly victory at Borodino, Napoleon entered Moscow. He expected to be greeted by dignitaries, formally offering the city's surrender. Instead, he discovered that 90% of Moscow's inhabitants had fled. A fire had started the previous night and was blamed on drunken soldiers. But over the next 48 hours, fires continued to break out across Moscow until most of the city was ablaze. Count Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, had ordered that Moscow be destroyed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands. And now fires were being started deliberately by Russian criminals freed from jail and acting on police orders. French soldiers rounded up and shot any they could catch. But the inferno was impossible to contain. In 4 days, two-thirds
of... Napoleon understood the importance of Moscow, which I understand exactly why he probably figured, alright, they're done, we captured Moscow. But yeah, I don't even think he could have anticipated that they would burn down their most sacred, historical city. But they did, and that's a big thing to do. Like, Moscow was beyond important to the Russians, and for them to do that is telling of just how big of sacrifices they were willing to make to just stop Napoleon.
Moscow was destroyed. With the fires finally under control, Napoleon's soldiers turned their attention to systematically looting the ruined city. While from his new quarters in the Kremlin, Napoleon sent a letter to Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg, inviting him to make peace and end the war. He received no reply.
He got left on
Napoleon
red.
waited, confident that Alexander would eventually negotiate. But as the days passed, he grew increasingly uneasy. Cossack raids were disrupting his vital communications with Paris, as well as the arrival of supplies, while the steady attrition of French forces and Russian reinforcements meant Napoleon was outnumbered for the first time in the campaign. Rumors also reached...
Like I said, he showed up there with 600,000 men, and now he's the outnumbered one. He lost so many men just getting to Moscow. It is insane.
That his reluctant allies, Prussia and Austria, were in secret talks with his enemies. Napoleon had proposed that the army winter in Moscow, but that now looked too dangerous. Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters. Napoleon knew how severe Russian winters could be, but continued to put off his departure, reassured by fine October weather, and hoping that at the last minute there might be a message from Alexander offering peace.
Yeah, that's a big mistake from Napoleon. Yeah, that was a big mistake. He should have probably gotten out of there as quickly as possible. He was confident in Alexander, but you know, Alexander's reply, but that was not meant to be.
It never came. On the 13th of October, the first light snow fell. 5 days later, Kutuzov launched a surprise attack on Murat's advance guard at Vinkovo and defeated it. Napoleon, stung into action, gave the order for the army to leave Moscow the next day. Our video sponsor, the legendary world...
Now is the moment my campaign begins, and holy crap. Oh crap. Yeah, that's frightening. That quote, like, oh man. Now begins the annihilation of
100,000 men
Napoleon.
of the Grande Armée left Moscow in a column 10 miles long, with an estimated 40,000 carriages and carts. There were women and children too, army wives and the vivandières, the women who cooked for the soldiers, as well as some civilians. Every wagon and pack was stuffed with as much food and loot as possible. As he set off, Sergeant Bourgogne of the Imperial Guard made an inventory of his pack. It contained several pounds of sugar, some rice, some biscuit, half a bottle of liqueur, a woman's Chinese silk dress embroidered in gold and silver, several gold and silver ornaments, amongst them a piece of the cross of Ivan the Great. Besides these, I had my uniform, a woman's large riding cloak, 2 silver pictures in relief, 12 inches long and 8 high, all in the finest workmanship. Also several lockets and a Russian prince's spittoon set with precious stones. I wore over my shirt a yellow silk waistcoat, which I had made myself out of a woman's skirt. Over that, a large cape lined with ermine and a large pouch hung at my side by a silver cord. This was full of various things, amongst them a crucifix in gold and silver and a little Chinese porcelain vase. Then there were my firearms, powder flask, and 60 cartridges in the box.
Yeah, so to put it simply, he came out loaded. Man. Wonder if Murat was there. Like, I can't imagine what he came out, like, wearing. You know? He came out with all the fashion, the latest Russian fashion. Every time I think of Murat, I think of, like, a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character. Because, like, I just imagine this flamboyant posing, like Polnareff, you know? For anyone who knows anime, I don't know how much of you guys know anime. I know a lot of you are just who watch these videos are mainly just history buffs, so I'm not sure if anyone's knows anything about anime. That's how I imagine Miron.
This heavily encumbered army did not yet realize it was in a race against time. The Russians were beginning to move against the flanks of Napoleon's 550-mile-deep salient. That very day, Wittgenstein's army was driving back Marshal Saint-Cyr's outnumbered force at Polotsk and drawing Victor's 9th Corps west to support them. In the south, Admiral Chichagov's advance had Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps falling back to cover Warsaw. The corridor was closing.
I don't think this was Russia's plan at all, but it's genius. Like, this is a happy mistake, as I will call it, because they let Napoleon so deep into enemy territory, and through attrition he lost his numerical strength, and now he's trapped in enemy territory and having to leave, and yeah, he's just being pressured on all sides. Like, essentially his opening of escape is being closed. Like I said, I'm pretty confident that was not their plan, but if it were, then I would say the Russians are geniuses. But no, this is just a happy mistake that was given to them by Napoleon's own mistakes of managing this campaign and waiting so long to leave Moscow. Like, yeah, this was just handed to them on a silver platter. Like, here you go, guys, a chance to defeat me.
And then there was the weather. Though Napoleon was confident his army could reach winter quarters in Smolensk in 20 days, well before the more extreme temperatures were due to hit. Napoleon planned to withdraw via Kaluga, through unspoilt country where the army could forage for supplies. But Kutuzov sent General Dokhturov's 6th Corps to block the road at Maloyaroslavets. In fierce fighting, Italian troops of Eugene's 4th Corps drove the Russians out of the town. It was a hard-won victory, reminiscent of the fighting at Borodino. Kutuzov now stood between Napoleon and Kaluga. Napoleon now took the unusual step of conferring with his marshals.
Is that the MVP, Davout? I recognize that bald cranium anywhere. I love Davout, man. I'm such a Davout fanboy. In my eyes, he can do no wrong.
And after discussing various options, he decided that rather than seek another major battle, they would retreat the way they'd come, along the Smolensk road. Napoleon had hoped to avoid this route, as it meant marching back through country already stripped bare of supplies. The day after the fighting at Maloyaroslavets, Napoleon was nearly captured by a group of Cossacks, and saved only by General Rapp's charge at the head of his escort. After this close shave, Napoleon had a phial of poison made up, which he carried around his neck in case of capture.
Yeah, Napoleon hasn't been that close to capture since Eylau. Like, man. The Russians have come closer to anyone than capturing Napoleon, huh? And decimating him. Those who were too weak to carry their weapons or knapsacks threw them away and all looked like a crowd of gypsies.
I saw war. I saw bombing. I saw...
Napoleon's army set off on its new course, shadowed at a respectful distance by Kutuzov's army to the south. They passed the old battlefield of Borodino, a grisly, unnerving sight where crows pecked at half-buried corpses. Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and horses. A few days later, the temperature fell below freezing. the army's overworked, starving horses died en masse. Discipline began to break down, as some drivers simply dumped the sick and wounded by the roadside to try to ensure their own survival. As the French column became increasingly strung out, General Miloradovich, commanding Kutuzov's advance guard, fell on Davout's rear guard, outside Vyazma. For a few hours, Davout's first corps was cut off, until Eugène and Ney came to his rescue. The battle ended with street fighting in Vyazma, as the French hastily evacuated the burning town. For the soldiers of the Grande Armée, so unaccustomed to retreats and routes, Vyazma was an alarming, demoralizing blow.
The road was strewn with the dead. Our suffering exceeded imagination. Yeah, I bet.
On the 4th of November, it began to snow heavily. The next night, temperatures plummeted to -20 degrees centigrade. Few men or women had proper winter clothing or access to shelter. Many froze to death overnight. The next morning, wagons and guns were abandoned. Many soldiers sought to save themselves, ignoring officers, stealing horses and food, and leaving the column to scour the countryside for supplies. Many of these foragers were found by the Cossacks. Some cut down or lanced, others robbed of every possession and left to freeze. In a few cases, they were handed over to peasants, eager for retribution against the foreign invaders who had plundered all they owned. As the army struggled on towards Smolensk through blizzards, Napoleon ordered Eugène's 4th Corps to strike out for Vitebsk, where there were large French supply depots. But Vitebsk had already fallen to the Russians. 4th Corps was too weak to fight its way through, and rejoined the army, minus its artillery and most of its baggage. A colonel who saw 4th Corps at this stage described men without shoes, almost without clothes, exhausted and famished, sitting on their packs, sleeping on their knees, and only rousing themselves out of this stupor to grill slices of horse meat or melt bits of ice. Just 3 weeks after leaving Moscow, a third of the army was dead or captured. About half the rest formed a growing army of stragglers, men without units, prepared to fight only to survive. Napoleon reached Smolensk on the 9th of November. The first troops into town ransacked the supply depots, leaving nothing for those who followed, including Ney's rearguard, which arrived 6 days later. Napoleon had hoped to make Smolensk his winter base, but the state of the army and lack of supplies meant the retreat had to continue. But the 5 days he spent there gave Kutuzov time to circle ahead and prepare an ambush. When the French retreat resumed, he struck 30 miles west of Smolensk at Krasnoi. In 3 days of desperate fighting through knee-deep snow, Napoleon used his Imperial Guard to hold open the road, as Eugène and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses. 2 regiments of the Young Guard were ordered to make a sacrificial counterattack to keep the Russians at bay, and were virtually annihilated.
My gosh.
Kutuzov held...
This is just brutal, man. I don't know what to say. Like, I just want to pause and just be like, oh my gosh. Just every few minutes, it's just like, everyone's dying and freezing, and this is Napoleon's greatest military disaster, like a catastrophe, you know, of epic proportions. Like, I don't know, man. The fact that he even makes it out of this is insane, but Yeah, the Grand Army, I said that the Grand Army after Russia isn't grand anymore. Because, like, yeah, like, so much death. It is... I can't even imagine braving through even a little of what these men braved through. They have my eternal respect, you know?
Back many of his troops, and was blamed for not trying to destroy Napoleon's army when he had the chance. It's possible he was concerned at the number of raw conscripts in his own army, also suffering terribly in the freezing conditions.
All the Cossacks and the Russians in the world shall not prevent me from joining the army. Dang, Ney!
Not every French corps broke through at Krasnoi. Marshal Ney and his 6,000-strong rearguard arrived on the 18th of November to find the road blocked by 60,000 Russian troops, and no sign of the promised support from Davout's First Corps. Ney's men hurled themselves against the Russian lines with desperate courage, but were mown down. Rejecting several invitations to surrender, Ney led the survivors in a daring night crossing of the Dnieper River, then across 45 miles of open country under constant attack from Platov's Cossacks to reach Orsha.
Wow. Yeah, Napoleon, I think, nicknamed Ney the bravest of the brave. Well deserved, man. Like, dang, they fought through hell to get to Napoleon. Good job, Ney, man. It's so good to see impressiveness like this. The Grand Army is still the Grand Army, even like when it's like completely like losing. It's still just impressive, man.
By the time Ney rejoined the army, his rearguard was down to just 800 fighting men, leading a column of several thousand stragglers. The army regarded his escape as a miracle, and when Napoleon heard of it, he immediately dubbed Marshal Ney the bravest of the brave.
Yeah, well deserved, that title, man. This is beginning to be very serious. You think, Napoleon? You think? You probably should have thought that when you were marching to Moscow, but yeah, I feel like, oh man, I love you, Napoleon, but this isn't your finest hour. No offense, this invasion isn't your finest hour.
Napoleon had escaped one trap, but now 3 Russian armies were closing in from different directions and outnumbered him nearly 3-1. From the east, Kutuzov's main army with 65,000 men. From the north, Wittgenstein with 30,000, steadily driving back Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. And from the south, Admiral Chichagov's army of Moldavia with 34,000, having detached General Ostensaken with 30,000 to prevent Schwarzenberg's Austrians and Reynier's Saxon Corps marching to Napoleon's aid. Napoleon was heading for Minsk, a major French supply base with vast stores of the food, clothing, shoes and ammunition that his army so desperately needed. But on the 21st of November, disastrous news arrived. Minsk had fallen to Chichagov. He'd then marched on Borisov, driven out the Polish garrison, and captured its bridge over the Berezina river. By rights, the Berezina ought to have frozen solid by now, so Napoleon could have crossed anywhere. But a sudden thaw had turned the river into a torrent of ice and freezing water. Napoleon was at least joined by the hard-fighting Marshal Oudinot and his 2nd Corps, which hadn't suffered as badly as the main column on its retreat from Polotsk. Oudinot launched an immediate counter-attack on Borisov and retook the town, but couldn't stop the Russians burning the bridge. With no other bridge for miles in either direction, it seemed Napoleon's exhausted army was finally doomed. But there was one sliver of hope. Polish cavalry had found a ford across the river near the village of Studienka. Napoleon issued a flurry of orders. Second Corps was to fake preparations for a river crossing south of Borisov. Victor's 9th Corps, arriving from the north, was to form a rear guard east of Studienka to hold the Russians at bay, while engineers worked as quickly as possible to build pontoon bridges across the river and win Napoleon's army a fighting chance of escape.
Our situation is unparalleled. If Napoleon extricates himself today, he must have the devil in him. Yeah. Good old Napoleon trickery, and the fact that it works is awesome. Like, he manages to lure them so you can get out quick.
The afternoon of the 25th of November, General Eblé's Dutch engineers began building two 300-foot pontoon bridges across the Berezina river. They worked day and night, sometimes chest-deep in freezing water, and completed both bridges in less than 24 hours. Few of the engineers survived the ordeal.
When you have these woke revolutions, it requires all of us at some point to say, no, not going to.
Chichagov had been...
Man, these brave engineers, man. You know, guys, I have a... You know, I in the year 2022 to early 2023, I suffered for the first time in my life, like, depression and suicidal thoughts and all that. And I fought tooth and nail to overcome that, because despite those awful feelings and thoughts, I had a real strong desire to live. And by the way, don't worry about me now. I'm fine. I don't have any depression or suicidal thoughts. I've been good. I'm good, you know. But yeah, I fought really hard because I really wanted to live, you know. I wanted those thoughts, those feelings gone. I wanted to feel normal again. And that took a year of struggle and, you know, fighting. And like I said, like, it instilled me that I have to this day a strong desire to live at any cost necessary. That is why when I'm looking at these soldiers, Napoleon ordering certain troops who are almost certain to die, like the young corps, almost like like he mentioned earlier, a sacrificial attack, like these men going into like freezing waters, like people who are certain to die, and they must have known it too, like with these frontal assaults, and just willing to die, willing to put themselves in a situation where death is certain. I just can't. It amazes me, you know? Not to say they're suicidal or anything, but yeah, you kind of have to be cool with the concept of death, at least a little, to, like, do that. And, like, I can't... This is why I could not be a soldier. This is why I could not be a military man, because I don't think I have it in me to ever put myself in a situation where I could potentially lose my life, you know? Which is why I'm amazed by everyone here. They are doing their best in literal hell, you know? That's insane.
Totally fooled by the diversion south of Borisov, and was moving his troops south to face it, allowing Napoleon's army to begin crossing its rickety bridges virtually unopposed. Oudinot's 2nd Corps led the way to secure a bridgehead, followed the next day by the remnants of the main army. Priority was given to formed troops, still able to fight. For the time being, the army's vast crowd of stragglers remained on the far bank. By the time Chichagov realized his mistake, and began moving north. Napoleon had troops in place to defend the crossing. On the east bank, General Partonneux's 12th Division, 4,000 relatively fresh troops from Victor's 9th Corps, formed the rearguard. As Platov's Cossacks approached from the east, the vanguard of Kutuzov's main army, Partonneux tried to rejoin 9th Corps. But caught in a swirling blizzard, with visibility down to 50 meters, he marched straight into Wittgenstein's army. His entire division was killed or captured. The next morning, Chichagov and Wittgenstein...
Rip, like, that... Man, these blizzards, man, they do a number on soldiers. That sucks.
...launched coordinated attacks on both sides of the river. There was desperate fighting on the west bank, where Marshal Oudinot was, yet again, seriously wounded, but his Swiss infantry held the line, until General Doumerc's cuirassiers, the army's last heavy cavalry, charged and routed the Russians. At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rearguard held off the Russians until dark, then pulled back across the bridges. For 2 nights, officers had been trying to get the vast camp of stragglers to cross the bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay put, huddled around their fires. At dawn on the 29th, with the army leaving and the Russians approaching, thousands of stragglers surged in panic towards the bridges. Dozens were crushed underfoot. Others fell or were pushed into the water, or tried to swim, which was certain death. When French engineers burned the bridges at 9 AM, thousands were cut off and left to the mercy of the advancing Cossacks. Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
What appalling misery. What a multitude have perished in this retreat.
Since the retreat began 43 days earlier, the Grande Armée had marched nearly 500 miles, under constant attack, starved, exhausted, and for the last 23 days, in lethal sub-zero temperatures, without proper clothing or shelter.
I think I'm gonna give praise to the Grand Army. The Grand Armée, like, man, they have put up the best, like, you know, resistance that they possibly could in this retreat. And they, yeah, it just goes to show just, I guess, like, I can't imagine anyone else doing as well as they did. I mean, granted, it's still a complete disaster that resulted in so much death, but like I said, like, I can't imagine anyone else doing as well as they are doing. Like, given that literally everything is against them, the fact that they've managed to fight their way as best as they could and escape is insane. But yeah, the Grand Army is practically destroyed after this retreat.
In that time, the fighting strength of the Grande Armée had been reduced from around 124,000 men to 20,000, with as many stragglers still following the army. As the retreat continued to Vilna, the weather turned even worse, the temperatures falling to -37 degrees centigrade. The Russian armies at least now held back, leaving the winter, Cossacks and Russian peasants to finish off the invaders. On the 5th of December, Napoleon left the army, travelling incognito across Europe at breakneck speed, and reaching Paris in just 13 days. Naturally, English satirists capitalized on Napoleon.
Any little thing Napoleon does that isn't like, that's a mistake, you can be assured that the British will jump in to make it even worse. Just like kicking a horse while it's down, or what's it say? Kicking a dog when it's down. Either way, they're there to like make sure everyone knows Napoleon messed up,
seeming
big
to
time.
abandon his defeated army. And many soldiers did regard it as an act of betrayal. But his generals supported his decision to leave. There'd already been one attempted coup against Napoleon in Paris, and there was much work to be done to rebuild the army and reassure France's allies. On the 9th of December, 51 days after the retreat began, around 20,000 ragged survivors of the Grande Armée began crossing the Niemen River back into friendly Polish territory. According to legend, Marshal Ney was the last man across.
I love that, man. A lot of respect for Ney on this.
Round 1.
Yeah, Ney, man, just a lot of respect for the man. He really showed his grit in this situation. Second and third corps are no more than a memory. The latter numbers only 60 men. Marshal Ney to Marshal Berthier.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia had proved to be one of the greatest military disasters in history. He had made fatal miscalculations about geography, logistics, and above all, Russia's political and strategic response to his invasion.
Yeah, this is Napoleon at his lowest, in my opinion. This is like him at his lowest moment, where he made his most fatal of errors and mistakes. And yeah, this is Napoleon at his lowest moment, and it's just a complete disaster of how everything went. Just a complete disaster is the best word to put it. And the strength he had in one invasion, like, he began this with the biggest army Europe had ever seen, the peak of his strength, and it's just gone in one invasion. This is the moment Europe was like, yeah, Napoleon, we can take out Napoleon finally. And though he puts up a great fight, this is where it's like sealed his, in a sense, a big event that sealed his doom. And yeah, his downfall, basically.
These blunders cost his empire around 500,000 men, as well as 250,000 horses and 1,000 cannon. Put another way, of every 12 men who marched into Russia with the Grande Armée, one was killed in action or died of wounds. 2 were taken prisoner, one of whom died in captivity. 7 died from disease or the effects of climate. Just 2 returned alive. Contrary to myth, many more soldiers had died in the summer advance from heat, typhus and dysentery than were lost in the winter retreat.
Yep.
Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000, and a huge but unknown number of civilian deaths. The Russian campaign was a catastrophe for Napoleon, not just in lost troops and resources, but in damage to prestige and reputation. That winter, All his enemies sensed weakness and prepared to join forces against him. But the emperor...
Like frickin' sharks, man. You know, Napoleon was surrounded by sharks and snakes, man. But, yeah, like I said, like, if Napoleon hadn't invaded Russia, he could have held his power for so many more years, probably. Like, he could have... As I don't know for how much longer. Granted, Spain was still an issue. But, yeah, Napoleon could have at least held his power for so much longer. But this was just like a free fall. Like, he was already losing men, you know, with the Spain thing. He was already bleeding himself dry, but this was like just a complete free fall in terms of numbers and stuff. And yeah, this is where everyone was just finally like, let's get rid of him, you know? This is our chance to finally undo Napoleon. And yeah.
wasn't going down without a fight. Back in Paris, he admitted to his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me, gentlemen. I've let it lead me astray. Instead of following my plan, I went to Moscow. I thought I'd make peace there. I stayed too long. I've made a grave mistake, but I'll have the means to repair it." Thank you to all the...
Yeah. Just, not Napoleon's finest hour, sadly. And, yeah, just catastrophe, like he put it. And it's a shame, because from here on out, now Napoleon's fighting a battle he can't win. A war he can't win. And we're about to witness his complete downfall. So I'm trying to rough through these videos right now. So I'm going to continue down to the road of Leipzig. I will see you guys there. Bye, everyone.